Uh, okay. Actually, Shireen, would you be able to grant me hosting rights? I have a slideshow to show you. Well, thank you all for having me back. Um, I did present with you last year about a place called Lalibela in Ethiopia. And my presentation, or my talk rather, this evening for Vespers is going to take a slightly different turn. I'm going to share sort of a more personal reflection on Black History Month and why I personally think it's important that it's something that we remember. So bear with me while I get my slides up, and I will be with you in just a moment. There we are. Can I have a thumbs up if you can see the slides okay? Good, 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 good. So in the time that we have here, I want to talk to you about how a 1950s barber's license from Kingston, Jamaica, ended up in an exhibit at the Jewish Museum in London. How a 1950s barber's license from Kingston, Jamaica, ended up in an exhibit at the Jewish Museum in London. My grandfather, Arthur Alexander Malcolm, was the first Afro-Caribbean barber in Reading, England. Reading's a town not too far from Newbold College. And my grandfather, he was a part of the generation who, at the invitation of Her Majesty's government, traveled to the UK to start a new life and help rebuild Britain in the aftermath of World War II. Now, when he passed away in 2014, we discovered that he had kept a number of documents from his time in Jamaica, but also from his journey to England. And so if you have a look on my screen there, you can see his barber's license from Kingston, Jamaica. And on the other side, you can also see his permit as well. And what was really interesting, now, you know that, how shall I put this? As people of color, we take our hair seriously. And I found it really interesting to note that he needed a permit from the medical examiner's office, and that he also needed a license to practice in his craft in Kingston, Jamaica. I also mentioned that he included a number of documents, and actually one of the interesting things that we found was his original boat ticket from when he traveled across. I always found it fascinating that after all of these years, he kept these, and I think it says something about how it was important for him to remember that journey that he took. And there may be some who are listening or in this Zoom who maybe remember taking a similar journey themselves from somewhere that's maybe warm and tropical, like where Shireen is now, to colder climes. I have fond memories of my grandfather because he was the first Black barber in Reading. His home became a real hub for the Black community. And I remember that whenever I would go to his house, usually if it was on a Sunday, if I was getting a haircut, it would just be buzzing with people. One of the things that I always remember about him was that he was a master storyteller. And he would always share tales about his upbringing in the Caribbean. He would tell us about the fruits. He'd tell us about the animals that he would catch. He'd tell us about how sometimes they'd go down to the river. He'd tell us about fishing. He'd tell us about our family, our uncles. And the way how he would tell stories was always sort of ignite an interest in Jamaica, where he was from. He'd tell these stories, and you'd want to go back and visit for yourself to see all of the sights that he would discuss, to taste the food and the fruits, and to feel the sun on your skin. I think I may have mentioned this another time that I was with you, but he was also what I would describe as a master storyteller. So he would share with us some of the folk tales. He'd share with us about Anansi, who I refer to as the original Spider-Man. He would share with us stories and oral tales that had traveled from West Africa to the Caribbean and to the Americas, in the memories of those who survived the horrors of the transatlantic slave trade. The stories that he would tell us about Anansi were very fascinating for me. You see, Anansi was a trickster who would find clever and creative ways to overcome his often stronger opponents. And I think that maybe one of the reasons why the Anansi stories survived that transatlantic journey was because those stories, I believe, would bring hope to those who lived in the shadow of empire, who had to endure and survive horrific circumstances. And as I was reflecting on this and my memories of my grandfather, it just sort of reminded me of how important it is for us to tell our stories. As a pastor, one thing that has really struck me through some of the funerals that I've conducted and attended is that his generation is passing away. And so some of the stories that he told me, I'm no longer able to hear them from him anymore. And the number of those in our churches and in our community who can share stories of their experience of coming over to the UK in the 60s and so on. The people who can share those stories, who can keep those memories and those histories alive, are getting less and less each year. So it's important that we share our stories. It's important that we keep those oral histories alive. Now, my sister Helena, she studied Christianity and the arts at King's College in London. Now, I would describe her as a creative at heart. She's always been interested in art and painting and doing all sorts of wonderful and abstract things with her hands and all sorts of interesting materials. While she was at King's College studying Christianity and the arts, she actually responded to an invitation in 2015 to submit some items for an exhibit called Journeys at the Jewish Museum in London. Her submission was accepted, and alongside the display, I have a picture of you here. This is the display that was exhibited at the Jewish Museum. And if you look in the display, you can see my granddad's barber's license, as well as some of his tools. And if you look at the top left, you'll see a bottle, and you could just about make out some of the letters D-E T, and some of you could probably guess what the rest of it. That was his Dettol bottle. And one of my memories was that, when I would visit, when we would stay over, I remember that a little bit of Dettol would often be put in the bath. As a barber, he was meticulous about keeping his tools clean. I still remember the smell. But next to this exhibition were the following words. I'll read them for you. Arthur Alexander Malcolm was born 26 February 1929 in St. Elizabeth, Jamaica. He moved to the capital, Kingston, and worked as a licensed barber for a number of years before emigrating to England in 1961. He resided in Reading, Berkshire, where he became the first Black barber to set up shop in the community. Following in the footsteps of his father and grandfather, Arthur was a devout Seventh-day Adventist who kept the Sabbath. Arthur's suitcase contains his credentials and the tools of the trade, which includes trimmers, combs used for Afro-Caribbean hair, and a heavy-duty leather strap for sharpening razors. So right in the middle there is the leather strap. I remember it was waxy, and you can see if you look up there, there's a white razor. And I remember when I was really young, I didn't used to like when he would use the razor, because he used to sharpen it on the belt, and you sort of hear that sort of scraping and that sort of ping as it released off the top. But yes, he always made sure that my hairline was sharp. You can probably see I'm missing his touch. Now, the curators, those who put the exhibition together, remember the exhibition was called Journeys. And this is how they described the exhibition. They said that the Journeys exhibit is one that explored the theme of journeys, ranging from geographical migrations to spiritual and emotional transformations. The intimate testimonies that accompanied these objects were just as important as the pieces themselves. There was pain in some of these stories, born from the loss of homelands and loved ones. But there was also beauty and celebration. Now, this was the invite that they sent around to this exhibit at the Jewish Museum. And it really put a smile on our face as a family when we saw that they had used his tools to sort of feature in the main invitation. Some of you who frequent the barbers will think, yeah, times have really developed, especially in terms of the clippers, right? Yeah. But as I reflect on my grandfather's journey, I see all of the elements that the curators mentioned in his story. Geographical migration, a journey from the warm, sunny shores of the Caribbean to the cooler waters of the United Kingdom. I see spirituality in that he continued to remember the faith of his forefathers. I see transformation as I hear the stories of what he and others in his generation had to go through. I remember stories of pain, stories of loss, but also I remember beauty and celebration. Because as he looked back on his experience, as he shared his stories with me, he didn't share from a place of bitterness, but from a place where he recognized how the Lord had always brought him through. For me, during Black History Month, I remember him and I remember his generation with pride, not only because they brought a ray of tropical sunshine to these rainy isles, but because they paved the way for all who enjoy the rich cultural diversity that the best of this country has to offer. For me, it's important that the legacy of his generation, the Windrush generation, is remembered. And not only remembered, it's important to me that their memory is also honored. And I think that, many of us in here, I'm sure, will recognize that we live in a climate where history and knowledge of journeys such as my grandfather's, such as the Windrush generation, can all too easily be revised. And I'm sure many of us in here have heard of the Windrush scandal. where it appears that documents were that documented and proved journeys like my grandfather's were somehow destroyed. And so that is the story of how a 1950 barber's license from Kingston, Jamaica, came to end up in an exhibit in the Jewish Museum in London. Thank you for your time. Thank you for hearing my grandfather's story. And maybe just before I finish, I'll just finish with a prayer from the Psalm, and I'll hand it over to Shireen. Direct me, Lord, throughout my journey, so I can experience your plans for my life. Reveal the life paths that are pleasing to you. Escort me into your truth. Take me by the hand and teach me, for you are God of my salvation. I have wrapped my heart into yours all day long. Amen. That was Psalm 25, verses 4 and 5.
Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Amen.
Let me just stop the recording.